Welcome back, everyone, to Talking Papers Faceless Podcast. I'm Shaquille.
And I'm Aksa.
Glad to have you back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
We do these every Monday and Thursday, right?
That's right.
Always exploring cool new ideas. This time, we're going deep into Stoicism.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, using the Daily Stoic as our guide. So if you're into this kind of stuff, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, drop a comment, especially if you've got ideas for future deep dives.
Always looking for new topics.
All right, let's jump in.
You know, one of the things that really struck me about this book is how Stoicism isn't just some, dusty old philosophy. It was a big deal for some seriously impressive people throughout history.
Like who?
Well, you've got George Washington, Walt Whitman,
Wow.
Frederick the Great, even Adam Smith.
That's a pretty diverse group. It makes you wonder, what is it about this ancient philosophy that appealed to such successful people across, so many different fields and eras?
Yeah, good question. I think it has to do with the core principles of Stoicism. The book breaks them down into what it calls the big three: perception, action, and will. And the key here is that Stoicism isn't about just reading about these things, it's about actually living them. It's about having a great life, not just thinking about it.
So it's more about practical wisdom than abstract theory.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's been so relevant for people throughout history, even today.
Makes sense, especially in our modern world where there's so many distractions.
Oh, yeah?
Our phones are always buzzing, social media is designed to be addictive, and the news just keeps throwing outrage at us. I know, I definitely struggle with that sometimes, feeling like all that stuff can cloud my judgment and affect my ability to make good choices.
I hear you. It's so easy to get swept up in all of that external noise and lose sight of what's truly important. The Stoics were very aware of this and offered strategies for dealing with it. For example, this idea of perception. It's all about recognizing that you have the power to choose how you interpret things that happen.
So rather than letting those external distractions dictate how we feel, we can choose to see things from a more objective perspective.
Precisely. And that leads us to another key Stoic principle, recognizing that true wealth and freedom, they come from within. It's not about the money or possessions you have, but about your inner state.
I love that idea. It reminds me of some successful people today. The book mentions Warren Buffett, still living in a modest home despite being so wealthy.
That's a good example. What about John Urschel, the NFL player who retired early for a PhD in mathematics and lives frugally despite having millions?
Oh yeah, he's a great example too. And then there's Kawhi Leonard, the NBA star, super quiet guy, simple lifestyle, drives a beat-up old Tahoe even though he could have any car he wants.
Right.
It's so refreshing to see that material possessions and status don't equal happiness or fulfillment. These guys are all about simplicity, discipline, inner peace, things that are way more valuable than money or fame.
Absolutely. And the Stoics were onto this. They understood how we often fool ourselves into believing that external stuff will magically solve our internal issues. It's like that anecdote about F. Scott Fitzgerald in the book. He was so sure that wealthy people had some secret to happiness, but then he realized they just have more money, as Hemingway put it. Totally disillusioned him.
It's so easy to fall into that trap. If I just had this one thing, then I'd be happy. But the Stoics remind us that real lasting contentment comes from within, not from what we achieve or acquire.
Exactly. And that's where Epictetus's 3 areas of training come in: desire, motivation, and action. A framework for applying Stoic principles to our decision-making.
Okay, break that down for me. What does it mean to train our desire?
Well, think about it. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us what to want, what will make us happy. But are those really our desires? Or are they planted there by external influences? Epictetus says we should carefully examine what we desire and what we're averse to. Do they line up with our values and goals, or are they setting us up for disappointment?
So it's about becoming more aware of where our desires are coming from and whether they're actually serving us.
Exactly. And once we've done that, we need to look at our motivations. Why are we doing what we're doing? Are we acting out of fear or insecurity? Or are our actions driven by a deeper sense of purpose and integrity?
I know, I've definitely been guilty of acting out of insecurity or trying to please other people. It's easy to fall into those patterns without even realizing it.
It's a common struggle. But by becoming more aware of our motivations, we can make choices that are more aligned with our true selves. And then, of course, there's the action itself. It's not enough to just think about our desires and motivations. We need to put those insights into practice.
So taking concrete steps to achieve our goals, being mindful of the potential consequences of our actions.
Right. And doing it with discipline and focus, guided by reason and virtue.
This is some really interesting stuff. I'm already starting to see how these Stoic principles can be applied to everyday life. Before we go any further, I want to remind our listeners to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Let us know what you think so far.
And if there's any part of Stoicism you'd like us to explore more deeply, just tell us. We're always open to new ideas.
For sure. Yeah. Now, where were we?
Mm.
Yes, Epictetus' 3 areas of training.
So we talked about desire, motivation, and action, but how do we make sure our actions are actually good? That they lead to a good life? The Stoics had this idea of living in accordance with nature.
Okay, I'm listening. What does that even mean? Living in accordance with nature? It's kind of vague.
Yeah, it is. It has a few layers of meaning.
Hmm.
On a basic level, it means recognizing we're part of a larger natural order, Like we should try to live in harmony with the universe.
So more than just like going for a hike.
Right. It's about understanding that there are universal principles that govern everything, and if we try to live by those principles, we'll find peace and happiness.
Okay, I get that. But how do we actually do that? It still seems kind of abstract.
Well, one way is to focus on what we can control and let go of what we can't. The Stoics thought that a lot of our suffering comes from trying to control things we just can't.
Like the weather or traffic or what other people think of us.
Exactly. We can't control those things, so why worry about them? The Stoics said we should focus on what we can control: our own thoughts, our actions, and how we react to things.
That makes sense. It's empowering. Instead of feeling like a victim, we can focus on what we can actually change and make the best of any situation.
Yeah. And that brings us to the Stoic idea of indifference. Now, before you think that means not caring about anything, let me explain.
Okay.
Indifference, in Stoicism, means not letting things outside of your control affect you emotionally.
So it's more about staying calm and not letting external stuff make us happy or unhappy.
Right. It's recognizing that things like wealth, status, even physical comfort, those things don't inherently make us happy or unhappy.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. It's kind of the opposite of how our culture tells us to live.
Definitely. The Stoics offer a different path, finding happiness and fulfillment inside ourselves no matter what's going on around us.
So it's like shifting our focus from chasing things to cultivating a sense of inner peace.
Exactly. And that connects back to the idea of being a unified human being. Remember we talked about that earlier?
Yeah, the phrase rings a bell, but I'm not totally sure what it means. How does that relate to living in accordance with nature?
Well, think about it. When we're always chasing external things or trying to please other people or letting our emotions control us, we become fragmented. Like our thoughts and actions and values, they're all over the place.
It's like we're being pulled in a million different directions and lose that sense of wholeness.
Right. And that's what the Stoics called disintegration. It's like when we're not living in line with our true nature, with our core values and principles. And this often comes from vanity, needing that external validation, and ignorance, not really knowing what matters most.
So to be a unified human being, we need to know our values, act according to them, and not be swayed by outside pressure.
Exactly. And that takes self-awareness. We need to be honest with ourselves about our strengths and weaknesses, our desires and motivations. We need to accurately judge ourselves, as the book says.
I see. If we don't really understand ourselves, it's easy to get pulled off track.
Exactly. And that leads to the importance of protecting our inner peace from all those external forces. It's like we're constantly bombarded by distractions, temptations, other people's opinions.
It's true. It's like our phones are designed to steal our attention. Social media is a fire hose of negativity, and the news just thrives on outrage.
It's a lot. But the Stoics remind us that we have a choice. We can choose what we let into our minds. Epictetus, for example, said, "Keep constant guard over your perceptions, for it is no small thing you are protecting, but your respect, trustworthiness, and steadiness. Peace of mind, freedom from pain and fear, in a word, your freedom. For what would you sell these things?"
That's a powerful quote. It really highlights how important it is to be careful about what we consume, both information and the company we keep.
Exactly. And speaking of company, that brings us to another key point: being mindful of who we spend time with.
Yeah, the book talks about how important our social circle is. There's that famous Jim Rohn quote, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with."
Right. And James Altucher talks about finding your scene. Those people who push you to be better. Goethe put it really well. He said, "Tell me with whom you consort, and I will tell you who you are. If I know how you spend your time, then I know what might become of you."
It's a good reminder to really look at our social circles. Are the people we're spending time with lifting us up? Or are they holding us back?
It's a question worth asking. We have a choice in who we let into our lives. It's important to choose wisely.
And it's not always about cutting people out. Sometimes it's about setting boundaries, being aware of how much time and energy we're giving to certain relationships, and recognizing that not all relationships are meant to last forever.
And even when we are dealing with difficult people, the Stoics remind us that people rarely do wrong on purpose. Like Socrates said, nobody does wrong willingly.
So even when someone's acting badly, it's probably because they think they're doing the right thing, even if they're wrong.
Right. The book uses the example of the memorial for Confederate soldiers at Arlington. It says they served in simple obedience to duty as they understood it.
It reminds us that sometimes it's better to approach conflict with understanding and compassion rather than judgment and blame.
And that leads to another important Stoic principle, guarding against self-deception. Zeno, one of the Stoic philosophers, said that nothing is more hostile to knowledge than fooling ourselves.
It's so easy to think we're right, even when the evidence says otherwise. Our egos can get in the way of clear thinking and prevent us from learning from our mistakes.
The Stoics were all about being honest with ourselves about our flaws and where we need to improve. It's not about being self-critical, but about recognizing where we can grow.
I like how this connects back to living in accordance with nature. Aligning our actions with our values requires a clear understanding of who we are, both the good and the bad.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial part of Stoicism, our human ability to use logic and reason.
The book talks about how this lets us change our circumstances and make choices that reflect our values. It's not about being passive. We have the power to shape our lives and impact the world in a positive way.
It's a call to action, to use our reason to better ourselves, to help others, to create a better future. But to use this power well, we need to understand how our minds work, especially when it comes to emotions.
That's right. The book talks about choice and our internal power over our emotions. It's about recognizing that we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react. Like Marcus Aurelius said, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment.
It reminds us that we often blame our emotions on the wrong thing. Like we might say, my work is overwhelming, or my boss is frustrating, as if those things have power over our feelings.
But as the book points out, work can't overwhelm us and a boss can't frustrate us. Those are external things. They don't have direct access to our minds.
Right. The Stoics use the word hypolepsis to describe how our minds take up perceptions and thoughts and judgments. It's like choosing to see things a certain way, and that choice determines how we feel.
So instead of blaming external things for our emotions, we can see that it's really about how we're choosing to look at things. That's kind of a mind-blowing idea.
It is, and it can be really powerful. To illustrate this idea of choice, the book tells a story about President James Garfield.
Oh yeah. He faced a lot of challenges, a divided nation, a tough political climate, but he stood firm in his principles. He said, "Of course I deprecate war, but if it is brought to my door, the bringer will find me at home."
That's such a great example of how even in difficult times we can choose to act with courage and integrity.
It reminds us that we have the power to choose our response even when things are tough. We don't have to be victims. We can choose to act according to our values.
Speaking of choosing our responses, let's remind our listeners that if they're enjoying this deep dive, they can subscribe, like, and leave a comment. We love hearing your thoughts and suggestions for future episodes.
Absolutely. We appreciate all the support. Now let's keep exploring the wisdom of the Stoics. This next part really got me thinking. It's about how wealth and freedom are, in a way, already ours.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. The book says freedom isn't secured by filling up on your heart's desire, but by removing your desire. It makes you think about what wealth and freedom really mean.
Right. It's like there are two ways to be wealthy. One is to get everything you want, and the other is to want everything you have. The Stoics seem to be saying that the second way might actually be better.
It definitely goes against everything we're told, Like we're always supposed to be striving for more, getting the newest gadgets, a bigger house, nicer clothes. But the Stoics would say that's a trap.
It's like we're on this treadmill of consumerism, always chasing the next thing that we think will make us happy, but it never really does.
The book talks about how absurd it all is. Like we end up wearing clothes we don't like, eating food we don't enjoy, saying things we don't mean, all to impress people who probably don't even care about us. It's like that line from Fight Club, we buy things we don't need to impress people we don't like.
Oh yeah, that's so true. It's exhausting trying to keep up with everyone.
The Stoics would say that real contentment comes from within, not from things or what other people think. It's about being happy with what you have and appreciating the simple things.
And that reminds me of how the Stoics emphasized using reason in all things.
Right. The book quotes Marcus Aurelius, Hurry to your own ruling reason, to the reason of the whole, and to your neighbors. It's about letting your rational mind guide you and making choices that benefit everyone, not just yourself.
So it's like a three-part thing, considering yourself, the whole, and your neighbor when making decisions.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that we're not just individuals, we're all connected.
And it's not just about the big choices, right? It's about bringing that same intentionality to everything we do, even small things.
Yeah, even little things like what you have for breakfast or how you reply to an email at work. It's all a chance to practice what you believe.
But it's so easy to forget about all that when you're caught up in the day-to-day stuff.
The book warns about getting too focused on ego and status. There's this Marcus Aurelius quote, "Make sure you're not made emperor. Avoid that imperial stain." It can happen to you, so keep yourself simple, good, pure, saintly plain, a friend of justice, God-fearing, gracious, affectionate, and strong for your proper work.
It's a good reminder to stay grounded and focus on what's really important.
Yeah.
You're not getting caught up in power or fame, but prioritizing things like inner peace and integrity.
And speaking of staying grounded, the book talks about preparing for negativity by understanding why people act the way they do.
That sounds tough. How can you prepare for negativity without being, cynical?
It's not about expecting the worst from people. It's more about realizing that everyone's going through something. Like, difficult behaviors often come from a place of fear or pain or just not knowing any better. The book says, when you first rise in the morning, tell yourself, I will encounter busybodies, ingrates, egomaniacs, liars, the jealous and cranks. But then it says, these wrongdoers are still akin to me, and that none can do me harm or implicate me in ugliness, nor can I be angry at my relatives or hate them, for we are made for cooperation.
So it's about trying to understand where people are coming from and having empathy for them even when they're being difficult.
Exactly. And that leads to another important idea, testing our impressions and not just assuming things are what they seem. Epictetus said, from the very beginning, make it your practice to say to every harsh impression, you are an impression and not at all what you appear to be.
Yeah.
Next, examine and test it by the rules you possess, the first and greatest of which is this: whether it belongs to the things in our control or not in our control, and if the latter, be prepared to respond, it is nothing to me.
So it's like taking a pause before reacting to something and not letting our emotions control us. Instead, we choose a more thoughtful response.
Right, and that might mean stepping away from a situation or person that's making you feel negative, at least until you can calm down and think clearly.
The book uses the example of someone struggling with addiction, maybe doing things like prostitution. And it asks us to consider the bigger picture. How short-lived the praiser and praised, the one who remembers and the remembered have. Remembered in some corner of these parts, and even there, not in the same way by all, or even by one, and the whole earth is but a mere speck.
It's like a reminder that everything is temporary. Even the strongest emotions will fade eventually. The Stoics encourage us to detach a little from our immediate reactions and see things from a wider perspective.
It's not about ignoring suffering, but realizing that holding on to it only makes it worse.
And that perspective can also help us understand the consequences of doing bad things. Like the book talks about how even when you haven't been caught, guilt can eat away at you until you confess.
It says, there are immense costs of doing wrong, not only to society, but to the perpetrator. Look at the lives of most people who reject ethics and discipline, and the chaos and misery that so often follows. This punishment is almost always as bad or worse than whatever society metes out.
It's a reminder that our actions have consequences for everyone, even when we don't see them right away.
This next part is really interesting. It's about responding to negativity with kindness.
It's a pretty radical idea, right? Especially since we're often told to fight fire with fire. But the Stoics believe that responding to hate with kindness can completely change things.
The book quotes Marcus Aurelius. The best way to avenge yourself is to not be like that. And Seneca said, how much better to heal than seek revenge from injury? Anger always outlasts hurt. Best to take the opposite course.
And then it asks this question. What if the next time you were treated meanly, you didn't just restrain yourself from fighting back? What if you responded with unmitigated kindness?
It's like taking the high road, doing the unexpected. It could change everything.
It might feel strange at first, but the Stoics would say it's the best way to deal with negativity.
That connects to another key Stoic principle. The idea that true happiness comes from our actions, not from achievements or what other people think of us.
Exactly. It's about doing what's right and letting go of the need for approval.
There's this Seneca quote in the book, those obsessed with glory attach their well-being to the regard of others. Those who love pleasure tied to feelings. But the one with true understanding seeks it only in their own actions. Think on the character of the people one wishes to please. the possessions one means to gain, and the tactics one employs to such ends. How quickly time erases such things, and how many will yet be wiped away.
It reminds us that real fulfillment comes from living a meaningful life, not chasing pleasure or trying to impress others.
And that brings us to how important it is to make the most of our time. The book talks about how life is short and we should appreciate it.
Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough, and a sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements if it were all well invested. But when it is wasted in heedless luxury and spent on no good activity, we are forced at last by death's final constraint to realize that it has passed away before we knew it was passing."
It's like a wake-up call to live with intention, to go after what we're passionate about, and to make a difference while we can.
It makes you ask yourself, what am I really working towards? Is it something I care about, or am I just going through the motions?
And the book reminds us that our most important job is to be good people.
That's such a basic but powerful idea. It's about realizing that our character and our actions are the most important things. And anyone can do that, no matter who they are or what their situation is.
Exactly. We can be kind and compassionate, honest and fair in everything we do. We can live with integrity even when it's hard.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Stoicism, we want to leave you with one final thought. This book has challenged us to think about our beliefs, our habits, how we approach life. It reminds us that we have more control over our inner world than we think, and that real happiness comes from aligning our actions with our values.
And remember this Stoic advice. Waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be. Be one.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of Stoic wisdom. We hope you found it helpful and inspiring.
Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. We love hearing your thoughts and suggestions for future deep dives. Until next time, keep learning and keep living your best life.